Yeah, sorry about that. What happened just then is that my power died. Now, I hope it doesn't die. It is plugged into my computer. So hopefully this won't die. If it dies, we've got another camera with Jill, so it might be a bit jilted and cut up, but in any case. So just quickly recap for those who didn't catch that a few minutes ago. What happened yesterday and what are the issues?
Okay, what happened yesterday? Heiko and I and others from lettheuklive.com went into a meeting of the World Transform where they were talking about climate change, in particular man-made climate change and what the left have to do to act against it, and they're repeating things exactly like Extinction Rebellion have been saying. So we went there to ask questions and have debate. Heiko and I wished to ask questions. He got bundled out when he was only trying to get a question directly to the interviewer, the convener of the meeting, as to why we couldn't have a question, because some of us are well informed on the issue. I stood up and attempted to ask, where's the debate on this, and in particular point out that man-made climate change does not exist, and ask them specifically if they could provide one scientific paper with real data which shows that carbon dioxide levels cause changes in temperature.
It's just louder, that's all.
And we know there's no such paper.
One point I was going to make was...
And but I was bundled out. Well, no, they didn't bundle me out. They grabbed me, assaulted me. I pushed somebody back and just sat down and refused to move. And
it seems that Jeremy's wife, Laura, came and sat next to you.
Yes.
Was that sort of...
well, I didn't know she was going to do that,
okay.
And I suspect she was concerned about my welfare and what was going on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was the case, and it was a good thing.
The excuse
she sat there, and I would thank her very much for doing that.
Yeah, the excuse they made in the newspapers seemed to all adopt the same narrative, that we were disruptive and destroying the meeting and all the rest of it. And what really riled me was when they said, because first they said, it's 10 minutes for questions. And because you and I were standing up, it was obvious you could hardly avoid asking us to make a question or make an intervention.
And they know me.
And they know you, and you are the brother after all. And then they suddenly turned round and said, when it became impossible for them not to ask us a question, they suddenly turned around and said, only black women or young people.
That's right.
Right? Imagine they had said the opposite. Imagine they had said, only old white men.
Yeah.
There would have been an outrage in the meeting.
Yeah.
And so here you've got, the dialectic of their madness is that to try and then they said, did you hear what they said when they all got the cheer?
Yeah.
So they'd throw me out, drag me out, hurt my hand, my arm, my
Absolutely.
feet, and then outside they punched me in the face.
Violent, brutal, and punched you in the face. They didn't punch me in the face, but it was assault. We were both assaulted.
Exactly.
And then we've got police.
And then they cheered when they said, the term they used, this sort of mad woke term, was, do you know your privilege or something like that? Yeah, mad language, of lunatics. Why is your brother falling for this nonsense?
Well, it's disappointing he's fallen for it, because he knows very well, and I've told him many times, there's no evidence for man-made climate change. He's never produced any argument to the contrary.
So what did he do? Did he just sort of look away when you said those things to him? Or
he's doing political expediency, and I think when people have been around a long time in politics and Parliament, political expediency guides what they do.
So when he first became an MP, what was his spirit like? What was his political motivations? What drove him?
His political motivations were...
And how tight were you with each other then?
Oh yeah, well I always helped him campaign for years and years, from when he was age 15 in the Wrekin Labour Party Young Socialists in Shropshire, and I helped him in his council campaign.
A bit louder.
Helped him in his council campaign.
Closer, louder.
Helped canvassing for him, leafleting for him, and included did a lot of work to help him become leader, as did you.
You remember when he was standing for the election. It wasn't leadership.
Yes.
When he stood in election, You remember what happened? That one of your cousins was brought along to be a minder of you. And then we were walking down the street and they were watching our live stream, and I got a phone call from Jeremy Corbyn's office saying, please delete the video, don't do this, don't put it online. And then I said to them, look, we've been campaigning for you, we've given you support, you've never allowed us to do anything, and that, I say, like, participate in any decision, like, shall we do this, that? And then suddenly you call us up and say, we got to delete a video. I said, well, on what basis? What's the argument? And they said, oh, because it's Piers. When did you become the maverick to them?
Well, I think Jeremy's advisors had decided by then to go along with the climate change falsity as part of a raft of ideas, and that has been important to them to recruit greenwashed people who are brainwashed by the BBC. So
well, was it a sort of alternative to fighting against the capitalist system that you come out with stuff like climate instead, because everyone's affected by it,
well,
you know what I mean?
The origin of the Red-Green Alliance is exactly that, because I knew various Trotskyists who basically said that, oh, Piers, yes, the way forward now is a Red-Green Alliance, and
to get to the youth.
To get to the youth and get more state spending. They
Yeah.
equate massive state spending with socialism. Now, I pointed out, look, that's nonsense. Massive state spending is nothing to do with socialism. Hitler had massive state spending.
Quite right, yeah.
Stalin had massive state spending, and you can argue about what was going on there, but certainly it wasn't nice. So, state spending is not automatically good. It's an issue of accountability.
There's a guy called Adam Tooze. He's just written a book he wrote one of the most influential books on the crash. He's at Columbia University. And then he's written a book now about like the lockdown and meltdown of the economy and all the rest of it. And he basically says the Green New Deal, state spending, has appeared under the auspices of the pandemic. So it's the same thing, which is what you've basically been arguing, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think the important thing to understand about the Green New Deal is it completely unworkable, totally utopian, utter nonsense, right? Look, their greening of the whole energy economy is impossible. There's not enough minerals to provide the stuff you need for all the magnets, all the electric this and that, and all the wind farms. And even yesterday, in the meeting before we spoke, there was one of the contributors on the panel who did point that out.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I don't know what his answer was going to be, but there's two answers. One is you can't do it. The other answer is you have to find alternative materials, which I think is not possible.
Yeah, they're talking about mining the seas. That's the point, isn't it?
Or the third thing is you have a general world depopulation, which is what the New World Order wants.
Yeah, so that's an alternative method, I suppose. Yeah.
I don't know where this guy was leading, and that would have been a good point to discuss, which we would have discussed. However, we're excluded. You see, they don't want discussion. They want rah meetings just to say Tories are bad, we are best, we're more left-wing, whatever that means. We defend workers. Well, actually, what workers do you defend? I mean, right now, the COVID story is destroying jobs, destroying lives.
Be louder.
Destroying rights. And the Green New Deal, the climate con and the COVID con all emanate from the United Nations, World Economic Forum, and their drive for a new world order. Now, look, this is crystal clear to us. I'm sure that plenty of MPs understand that, but they go along with the narrative as political expediency in order to get re-elected, and hopefully they will get a place in
the New World Order.
Heaven. New World heaven. I don't know.
Well, there's plenty of jobs for the boys, isn't there?
See, there's no place for Jeremy in that. We know that. So he's stuck, actually, in a kind of limbo.
Well, no, they do get these old sages, don't they? Like, you look at Noam Chomsky, right? He was supposed to be a critical figure. For years and years and years, he wrote sort of, sometimes I think your language is a bit inflammatory, right? Okay. But his language was always preposterously inflammatory. Everything in the world was fascism, right, according to him. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump, Obama, Clinton, the United States itself, Western democracy, every action they took was was fascism and should be in the Nuremberg trials. Last week I had an exchange with him where he said the COVID unvaccinated must be isolated from the rest of the population. So you can have an old sage who they pull out at the right moment out of the hat to act like a reactionary pig, you know.
Well, do you think that would happen to Jeremy? I don't know.
I hope not, but he looks so worn out, doesn't he? You know, you're older than him, you know, but he looks worn. He looks like he's had it.
Well, he's been imprisoned by the trade unions. He's followed them all the time. They've obviously funded his campaigns. He believes trade unions represent the working class, which largely they do, but right now,
they're
political, largely, but right now the trade union leadership across the United Kingdom is almost completely agents of the new normal and the new world order.
Okay, but you remember the 1970s when the trade unions had real power.
Yes.
In other words, where there were shop stewards movements, grassroots workers movements inside the workplaces. So what did you guys do with it? Give me some examples of the type of things at that time in the 1970s when there was a real workers movement.
Well, him and I were in all sorts of campaigns for workers' rights, and there were a lot of those campaigns going on for workers' rights, equal rights of women, workers' rights for
like Grunwick and
immigrant
Saltgate,
workers,
anything like that?
absolutely. Grunwick's, various women workers in the garment industry, and Jeremy had been a trade union employee. A trade union representative in the garment, in tailor and garment workers, for example. In the 80s, we were active in the miners' strike. He was very active in the miners' strike, and so was I, collecting money, marching around the country. I got a badge going to Beavercoats Colliery in Nottinghamshire, for example. So then we were doing very similar things, but the failure of the left to continue on this path has resulted in a certain divergence, and I would say that the New World Order, World Economic Forum, will be building up for some time to carry out the programme that they're doing now, and unfortunately Jeremy and others have got caught up in that and have wedded themselves to it.
But that's
likely not that consciously, but they adopt what the trade unions say, which is furlough. Furlough is the death of British industry.
But those trade unions, there was a phrase that was used, I'm not sure who it was, one of the Labour movement representatives in the United States, actually, I think it was the Labour Lieutenants of Capital. So in other words, you got a trade unionist, they make some deals, eventually it's tea and sandwiches, either with the bosses or with the government, and they sell out the workers in order to line their own pockets. And that's, of course, we know the big trade unions in Britain, they get ridiculous amounts of income. A lot of them get more money than the MP.
Yeah. No, it's corruption. I mean, my idea of trade unions is these representatives should be paid the same as the people they represent, and they have to be accountable. They are accountable in a limited sense, but often when they get into power they fix things so that the elections are postponed or don't happen too often or whatever.
Well, it's not often, is it? It's all the time, isn't it, basically? What about your own experience in the Labour Party? When did you join and when did you leave?
I joined in 1983, just after my brother got elected, or thereabouts anyway, and I joined to help Labour in the Bermondsey by-election.
Okay. Was that John Bryan at the time, or was it Peter Tatchell?
It was the Peter Tatchell by-election.
Oh, right, okay.
It was a very dramatic affair. So I learned a lot from that. Joined the Labour Party, I became a councillor, was very active in the tenants movement, represented tenants for long periods of time, as well as my Labour members. I was a delegate to party conference in '98. I was invited to number 10 Downing Street by Tony Blair as one of the most effective voluntary organisers in the country.
What did he say to you?
He was very friendly. This was 1998, before these wars, and I said, you know my brother, and he said, yes, of course I do. I said, well, he's not very he's not very new, because we were talking about New Labour at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And Tony Blair said, that's okay, we're a big family church.
Yeah.
I said, well, that's nice. I mean, he was a reasonable chap. I mean, what he had in mind for the future, I don't know, or if he changed his mind towards the monstrous things he's done since then, I don't know.
Well, something interesting came out of the discussions, the interviews with Dominic Cummings, where he was basically saying our little network of Brexit campaigners took control of the government. So there are sort of factions who take control, and at the same time, behind that, there are all these people who really exercise control.
Yeah.
You know, like when he said, when the pandemic came, we didn't know what to do. And then the Bill Gates network came along, and they offered us all the solutions at once. So we adopted them, So it's like, big, there's the classical sort of Marxist term, capital control, like, big business controls and government is just their executive, to represent their common interests. But then there's different factions amongst them,
Absolutely, and as you rightly point out, the whole thing, you see, was planned. They had that event, whatever it was called, conference.
Yeah, 201,
201, where they were preparing for a pandemic that could happen.
A coronavirus,
a new coronavirus
from a pig.
Pandemic. And, this virus of this sort have been around for millions, if not hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah.
And they have this conference, and then 3 weeks later, this happens. Now look, what they were preparing for, which could have happened any time in a million years, happens 3 weeks after they've had a conference.
Well, it's actually about the fact that they can prepare for it, isn't it? It's the preparations is the issue. It's not about the virus, is it?
Indeed.
So it's the
how
discovery
do
of
they know
viruses.
how well to prepare at that time?
Well, funny, but they did have all this, at the time of the swine flu pandemic, because I've gone into that detail now since that time I looked into it. They did start all this stuff then. It was like they kept chipping away at the WHO, all these big pharma companies. They encircle the WHO in Geneva
The WHO
and constantly lobby
by
them.
essentially.
Exactly, and then they managed to get the WHO to change their definition of a pandemic from a disease killing many people in many countries to a flu-type thing circulating in many countries, which of course was the decisive thing to shift the balance. And once they declare a pandemic, then all the bloody countries have to spend the money on the drugs and vaccines and tests. And that's what they wanted. Exactly.
So when people in the street ask us, how is it that every country in the world agrees
That's why,
with
exactly.
this? Because it must be true if everyone agrees.
Exactly.
I say, look, it's the United Nations imposing this, and of course this is the same United Nations which told you about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which was a lie. So the WMD, the Climate Con, and the COVID Con are all one and the same origin, namely United Nations, World Economic Forum, and those who are pressing for a new world order.
There's this woman, Corey Morningstar, in Canada, and she's a great investigative journalist. She calls herself sort of deep green, and she was saying that the odd thing about this thing is they're all invisible enemies, The invisible enemy CO2, although Greta Thunberg says she can see it. The invisible enemy, the invisible enemy, the virus, the invisible enemy,
It's a trace gas.
Al Qaeda in a mountain.
I know. There's more argon in the atmosphere than there is CO2. It's a trace gas. It's a lower concentration trace gas. It's 0.04%.
That's why I thought 0.04%. Yeah.
And man's contribution to that 0.04% is 4% of that. So it's 0.04% times 4 over 100 is the percentage of man's contribution to the atmosphere here. The idea that causes fires, floods, is utterly insane. We know the reality is that carbon dioxide levels are controlled by temperatures, by a process involving solar activity and sea circulation.
Did you see the little interview that supposedly resurfaced between Boris Johnson and one of the Green members of the London Assembly? Do you see that last couple of days? And Boris Johnson is asked about whether he agrees with your point of view.
Oh, yeah.
And then Boris Johnson says, well, yes, and then they said, but Piers' articles aren't peer-reviewed, and the scientific consensus is this, and then Boris Johnson backs down and goes, or sort of half backs, saying, of course, climate change, climate warm change, whatever is happening, of course it is. Why is it that this madness of the idea of a consensus on science, why has this come about?
Anyway. But, you know,
but what does it mean?
What does it mean exactly?
I mean, Karl Marx was never peer-reviewed, right?
Indeed.
Isaac Newton was never peer-reviewed.
Isaac Newton was peer-reviewed because he peer-reviewed everything he wrote himself.
Right, but that's not peer-reviewed. Okay. Albert Einstein, I don't believe, was peer-reviewed, really. Karl Marx wasn't peer-reviewed. Sismondi wasn't peer-reviewed. Foucault wasn't peer-reviewed,
My discoveries of how to make long-range forecasting based on solar activity haven't been peer-reviewed because they haven't been published. But they still work, and we produce long-range weather forecasts which no other people can do. And of course, my brother Jeremy relied on these to organise his Labour Party socials every summer, and he asked me.
That's not scientific evidence.
What's the best date? Well, but he knows they work.
He did ask you, though, yeah.
He knows they work.
Oh, there you go.
And they did work.
Yeah.
So I find it rather sad that he then ignores everything I say about.
But the issue I'm asking about is
yes, of course.
Why peer review? Why are they so obsessed with this nonsense?
Peer review is about control. Peer review. I've had a debate about this with the editor of Nature at one point in one of these summer things, and I said, look, peer review should be public. Anyone can watch it. Obviously, the named experts can decide things. People with qualifications decide if something's right or wrong. But why it's right or wrong has to be in public, and they can even vote on it. Now, that is not how peer review works. Peer review goes to a committee of a few people who are around some magazine or other, and you don't know who they are. People who are being reviewed don't know who it is, and of course, things get decided on the basis of who knows who and what's going to happen next.
And where the funding's coming from.
Yeah. Because we found some emails in the famous email scandal of the Climate Research Unit of the University of Anglia, where they sent out an email that said, as the writer said, I'm going to ensure that Piers Corbyn and his cronies or his mates never, ever get anything published in any serious, respectable scientific publication.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, they were calling on me to publish what I knew and was able to do about long-range forecasting.
Yeah.
So they were calling on me to publish at the same time as they were going to prevent me being published.
I mean,
I didn't play the game. I said, no, guys, what I'm doing is currently confidential because we're part of a commercial operation.
Yeah. There's this guy, Johnny Leonidas, one of the most famous epidemiologists and experts in science, actually, in the world. And he published a document, his most famous document, actually, I think one of the most cited documents in the world, is why most scientific publications results are false.
Oh, yeah.
And he shows that the whole structure of the organisation of scientific funding is a sort of self-masturbatory process, yeah.
Absolutely.
So they just replicate what exists.
Everything they're doing. Like, what I'm saying, what I do about long-range forecasting and solar activity and various ideas and equations in that are completely new. Now, there are some very smart people that would listen to it, but I would suspect if I submitted this to any magazine, they would say, look, take up our street. No, I don't do it.
Well, I'm sure we can find something. I'll look around for you.
No, there are places where you can, but they're not going to be necessarily or likely to be these top journals. I mean, when I was doing things which in astrophysics which got to involve particle physics, we had some zany ideas with John Beckman, who was my supervisor at the time, and we discussed them. They were quite interesting ideas, and we checked everything. We gave them a go, but we sent them in. And we just got a totally rude reply. It wasn't anybody prepared to even discuss. It's just said, oh, this is just more acceptable under the modern way of thinking or something. It was not an argument.
Yeah. And of course, it's the same thing.
No, it wasn't a big deal to us because it was kind of a side thing, so we didn't pursue it. But the approach was just wrong.
But it's this same method, isn't it, going on with all the COVID stories, mask wearing suddenly, even though there had been lots, well, a fair number, 10, 12, detailed, serious scientific studies about wearing masks in clinical settings, which concluded they were not really of that much benefit. And that's in clinical settings for surgeons and so on. And then suddenly we had this madness that there had to be a consensus created that wearing masks in the open air was somehow of benefit. And now you have world leaders wandering around with black masks on their face.
It's a ritual. It's completely a ritual. Everything they do, these rituals and incantations are there to brainwash people, to make them carry on believing. We just had a big argument outside with somebody who walked up to us basically telling us that we're killing people. And we said, well, actually, no. The facts are the jabbing is killing people. She said, blah, 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 blah. And who do you quote? I said, well, we have what Dr. Vernon Coleman said. She said, oh, is he a real doctor? And she went on about it.
Yeah.
He is a real doctor.
Yeah.
That kind of upset her. But you see, whether he's a real doctor or not, there is data which shows that more people do die allegedly from COVID if they've been jabbed than if they haven't been jabbed. So, you don't need to be a doctor or not a doctor or anything to actually be able to understand and digest and critically think about data. However, this is not the way of the Labour Party.
Isn't it a sort of an intellectual elite who are trying to? It's not just the left, is it? It's all the liberals. No. They claim they know so much more and are so much smarter than the thickos, and that was sort of that was also represented in the whole Brexit discussion.
Of course. Anyway, on this I said to it, I quoted my Dr. Yeadon. I said, well, look, he's a former vice president of Pfizer. He says drop all the jabs and gives the reasons because they're dangerous. I think he knows more than you and I about the viruses, doesn't he? She couldn't answer that, but she knows the answer. He knows more than all of us about this issue.
There's this Italian Marxist called Antonio Gramsci, and he used to say that there were thinkers within the elites and amongst the working classes who sort of draw together the strands of thinking and become the leadership movement, the cadres, the specialists, the experts who draw together ideas. It seems to me that the intellectuals seem to succumb to this idea that they are the experts. The whole layer of them who have got a university degree somehow are experts who must virtue signal to everyone by wearing a mask. Pretend that they know what epidemics and whatever it is, but they still succumb to. I don't know who. If you ask them who is your expert on coronavirus, I don't know anyone they can cite. Patrick Vallance, Claude Van Damme, or whoever.
They're all paid the government.
None of them have actually explained what they mean and why.
Why? The science, which is anything they want you to believe.
I mean, we just come to a meeting here. The reason we're in this room now, the woman got really scared thinking we're about to do a protest in here. We came here for a Big Brother Watch meeting of Labour Party MPs and Sharma Chakrabarti and Rebecca Long Bailey on Big Brother Watch, like how dangerous are COVID passports and all the rest of it. And then when we got there, we were turned back and they returned our tickets to us and wouldn't let us in, using some excuse, it's full up or something, which it wasn't. Well, it seems it wasn't.
Well, they had a fixed number and that was it.
That's
insane because I've organised fringe meetings in Labour over the years.
And you pack them in.
And the struggle is to get them in. In. Someone can come late, they can come. It's free if you want to come now. Everything to get people in. Suddenly, when Heiko and I turn up, it's past time or full or something. Well, they told one person with us that it was full, another person it's not full, but we're past our quota or something.
Right.
Quota.
Right. So, when Jeremy was elected as leader of the Labour Party, what were the main problems he confronted, and why did you leave the Labour Party?
The main problems he confronted were right wing not wanting him to have anything like a leftish economic programme, involving, for example, mass spending on council housing, for example, and various adequate spending proposals on national insurance or whatever, or unemployment benefit. And international perspectives, he was supporting Palestine, which was something which a lot of Blairites certainly don't go along with. So, I was happy to be part of all that. I left the Labour Party because of the imposition of a demolition policy for the Aylesbury estate, the council estate in South London, Walworth, next to where I lived. And I left as I was a Labour organiser. I transferred everything I did to other people, called a meeting and said, guys, I'm quitting and I'm going to stand against Labour. And they were somewhat flabbergasted. But I did it in a way as to not be unfair to anybody. All the jobs were allocated and I just stood against them. We didn't win, but we did make quite an impact. Had a lie campaign against us. But it was the right thing to do, to stand up for council housing at the time. So that's why I'm outside Labour since then.
Okay,
2002.
Big Brother watch came to mind again. Being the older Big Brother, what was your relationship as kids?
It was fine.
Did you guide him and did he look up to you as a sort of
probably,
educator or what?
Probably did to quite an extent because I did very well at school.
And he didn't do so well, did he?
No, certainly not for science and maths anyway, but he was very good and interested in history and so forth. And did like debating. He enjoyed debating and arguing, so to speak. Well, all our family enjoyed debating and arguing, but it was a much more civilised way of debating and arguing than the Labour Party right now. So, but we got on well, I would say. And I always supported him in things he was doing, at school or outside when he was doing his early political work.
Yeah, okay. And when did you? What year were you born?
I was born in 1947.
And he was born 49 or 49?
He was born 2 years, 2 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days after me.
two. Lucky it's not 666, mate.
Well, indeed.
Otherwise we'd have exposed you.
Yeah.
Two adds up to 6.
But I think about that.
I don't know. I'm just
2 years, 2 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days. So
oh no, that's 8.
That's up to 8.
That's 8 then.
And that's success in numerology.
Yeah. So, what's happened now to the Labour Party? It looks almost like what we're experiencing, this hysterical campaign against us, against people who don't agree. What's happening? What's happening to the Labour movement and to the sort of intellectual classes, if you want to call it that?
Well, following something you said yesterday, I checked on the internet what was meant by the hate week and the hate. Was it a hate? 2 minutes of hate.
That's right.
In Orwell's 1984, and it was stunningly like what is exactly happening now. We are hate people. The Labour conference is a hate week.
That's right.
It's a hate week against Tories, but it's also a hate week against us. And in fact, it's much more of a hate week against us. So far as the left in the Labour Party goes, everything they're doing now is actually amounts to hate against us. I mean, I'm quite stunned. And these people screaming at the meeting when you were, happy that you're being dragged out. I mean, that was just like
madness. Madness.
Just like a 2 minutes of hate event, which George Orwell warned us of.
Yeah, no, that second event yesterday, there was a woman screamed at me, "You're Nigel Farage," and her son can't have been more than 13. Started shouting at me, "You're Nigel Farage, you're Nigel Farage." Oh, yeah. Crazy. I mean, he was
the
like
People's Assembly thing on the beach or near the beach.
Mad as hatters.
It was.
So, is this like the final throes of their madness?
Well, I think so. I don't think the Labour Party can recover from this. I don't think the Labour Party wants to recover from this. I don't think Keir Starmer wants to get power to liberate the workers. He wants to be part of the Green New
global
Deal
elite,
or
yeah.
the global elite, or he would happy to have a coalition with Boris Johnson. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, he's on a different page completely. We are on an absolutely different page from both Boris and the globalists, and also the left as it is now, because they are on the same page as the globalists. They are left social democrats. They believe they believe that more can be obtained if they press for it, but they have to accept certain rules to press for it, certain compromises, certain expediencies, and that's what they're doing. But the consequence is they are now tools of the mega corporations.
Boris Johnson, just to return to him, so he used to ask you every now and again about your climate forecast. How did he do that? Did you call him? Did he call you?
Called
What?
me. I still have his phone number. Though it doesn't reply, you might have changed his number. But no, he was very funny. He would phone you up in a very friendly manner. He said, "Oh, Piers, it's because I called him the helmsman, and he called me the wizard." It was very funny. I mean, he said, "Oh, it's helmsman here. Hi, wizard. Can you tell me?" And it was so funny. And he said, "Look, I've got to go along to this thing in Copenhagen. Can you just give me the heads up on just, what to say about, is it really, is it going to, blah, blah, how serious is all this?" I said, "Look, Boris, it is nonsense. There's no, I make it very simple." I said, "Look, carbon dioxide levels historically